It began with the emergency admission of a bizarre medical case.
George, I'm just going to flash a light in your eyes. I want to see if
What I saw when I went in the patient's room was remarkable. I had never seen anything like it before in my life. Here was this man, apparently in his 40s, who was frozen.
The key to this mystery would not be found in any medical textbook, but would lead instead to the underground drug world of California. Ironically, from that seedy world has come a major medical breakthrough, bringing hope to millions of sufferers of a devastating brain condition known as Parkinson's disease. The case of the frozen addict, next on Nova.
Major funding for Nova is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials.
In San Jose, California, something strange happened on July 16, 1982. One of the prisoners at the local jail awoke to find that he couldn't move or talk.
10:15-1, 10:49, VMC, ER in the ambulance.
Frozen like a pillar of salt, he was rushed to the Valley Medical Center. Nothing like it had ever been seen before, and arguments broke out as to what it was.
Seems to be alert and follows me with his eyes.
Well, let's take a look at that. George, if you can hear me in there, what I want you to do is to try to follow my finger very carefully with your eyes. Keep your finger just glued, your eyes glued on my finger here as I move it about.
A little bit of saccadic pursuit.
But he can do it.
Yeah.
He can do it.
I'd only seen one case that was close to that, a case of a very, very rare disease called Wilson's disease, but this wasn't even like that. So I could see why the arguments had broken out. The first real question that confronted us at that point was whether this man was mentally normal inside. Since there was no way to communicate, we didn't know.
Noticing that he could move his hand just a little, Doctors Langston and Ballard had an idea.
See if you can write the answers to some of our questions on this pad of paper. And I'm going to try.
And he could. As George Carrillo wrote, "I can't move right. I know what I want to do, it just won't come out right." By question and answer, a case history was built up. And in that history was a revealing statement. George Carrillo was a heroin addict. As would become clear, he was the victim of a bad batch of drug that had done irreparable damage to his brain. But his tragedy would open a new chapter in medical research. George Carrillo was just the first. His girlfriend Juanita, also a heroin user, was having even worse problems. To a neurologist, the symptoms were very familiar. They were textbook descriptions of a very common disease of the elderly.
These patients, of course, manifested all of the signs of Parkinson's disease. However, this was a difficult diagnosis to swallow. Parkinson's disease usually occurs over the age of 50. It comes on very gradually. In fact, it's so slow, it's almost imperceptible. Most patients have had symptoms for 1 to 2 years before they actually go to a doctor. That's how slow it is. In this case, these were younger people. The girlfriend was in her early 30s. And it came on almost overnight. Parkinson's disease doesn't do this, yet this looked like Parkinson's disease. So we had a first-class medical mystery on our hands at that point.
The mystery was only just beginning. That Friday, Dr. Phil Ballard left for a weekend break. He headed some 40 miles south to Santa Cruz, where he had been invited to a dinner party. In this unlikely setting, he was to stumble on the next clue. At the party was another neurologist, Dr. Jim Tetrud, and soon the two of them started to talk about their cases. What Ballard heard that night was remarkable. Jim Tettrude told him of a bizarre case of two brothers from nearby Watsonville that had just been referred to him. Like George and Juanita, they were frozen with all of the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. David and his brother had been found by their mother, lying frozen in their apartment. And there was another remarkable thing about them. They were both heroin addicts.
Here we now had a totally different family, different geographical location, and the key, both these brothers were heroin users. That identified the heroin. That was the only common link between these cases. At that point, we went for the heroin and started trying to get samples.
Langston also held a press conference to warn there was some very dangerous heroin on the street.
Basically, it's a profound slowing of all motor function. The patients are not able to talk, move, feed themselves, eat. Mentally, we think they're okay inside.
This was the first of many encounters with the media.
It's interesting to me how the involvement of the media, the press, really helped break this case. The first thing that happened was that we got a call the next morning from a public health nurse. And she said, you know, I saw you on TV last night, Channel 4 or something, and you were talking about this Parkinson's-like condition, and I'm seeing a young woman in her home. And this young woman was in a psychiatric unit for 3 weeks with a diagnosis, I think, of hysteria, hysterical paralysis. But she said, you know, she sounds just like what you described on TV last night. Do you think she could be another case? I said, well, did she use heroin? And the answer was yes. And we said, get her in. And we saw her that afternoon. That was our 5th case. And in some ways, this was the most tragic young woman. This was her first summer using drugs IV, and we all know kids experiment. She got this stuff, and she is probably the most affected.
This was Connie. And after Connie came still other cases, like Toby. By the end of July, there were a total of 7. How many other drug users out there on the California streets were at risk? California had always had more than its fair share of drug problems, but in recent years, police had come across a disturbing new trend.
What am I being arrested for? Selling fentanyl. Fairly hard. To who? Our agents. Man, that is wrong, brother.
Drugs were turning up on the street, packaged and sold as heroin that were not derived from the opium poppy nor from any other natural product. They came instead from underground laboratories. Here, entirely synthetic versions of hard drugs were made, some hundreds of times more powerful than heroin. And it was all quite legal. Since the drug's molecular structure was different from any outlawed drug, they could be made, sold, and used with impunity. They were to become known as designer drugs. The heroin that George and the others took was not real heroin, it was a synthetic designer imitation. But what exactly was it? Langston collected samples and sent them out to chemists all over California, like Stanford University's Ian Irwin, with a plea, find the guilty chemical. All substances have unique chemical fingerprints by which they can be identified. Using a mass spectrometer to analyze the compound, Irwin obtained the mystery substance's fingerprint. He then fed it into a computer in Washington where the fingerprints of many known chemical substances were stored. He was looking for a match. As expected, it wasn't heroin. But it didn't match with any of the 40,000 known chemicals on the computer. The compound was apparently completely unknown. While Langston and his team puzzled over the mystery designer drug, unknown to them, a local police investigation was closing in on a designer drug chemist. This man was the key to the operation. A suspicious list of chemicals fell into his possession. For the police, this was a big break, because in reality he was an undercover narcotics agent, better known today as Deputy Sheriff Dave Weidler.
48065, got it.
North 10, North 31, be advised the suspect is now...
Dave Weidler turned the list over to the county crime lab. What would a local resident want with such large quantities of chemicals? Forensic scientist Jim Norris had to decide one thing. Was this the basis of a designer drug operation? The key suspect was well known to them ever since a notorious incident in nearby Saratoga 18 months before, when his residence mysteriously caught fire. Police and fire officials discovered he'd been experimenting on a vast scale making designer narcotics, but they were powerless to arrest him. Now it seemed as if he might be at it again, and all Norris could do legally was stage a fire inspection, but the suspect was ready for them.
The owner of the laboratory, when confronted by the fire department, first said that he was attempting to make hand lotion and also attempting to make a new type of snow cone. The chemicals that had been purchased were not appropriate to make snow cones or hand lotion. Most of them were very poisonous, highly flammable, and also very expensive. He had spent nearly $10,000 to buy just the chemicals.
Then the police started to hear about the frozen addicts who were turning up at Dr. Langston's clinic at the Valley Medical Center. They wondered, could there be a connection?
We knew that Dr. Langston had seized some samples from patients who had been admitted. And we asked Valley Medical Center to give us those samples so that we might conduct a further legal investigation.
I got a call, started getting called from police, different police groups, and one in particular was Jim Norris of the local narcotics agency. And I remember that conversation quite well because he said, Dr. Langston, we understand that you have some samples of this synthetic heroin. And I said, yes. And he said, well, we'd really like some of that. We need some of that for analytic purposes in our lab. And I said, I was being very nice, and I said, well, I'd really like to loan you some, but we just have a very small amount left of what we think is the critical sample, so I'm afraid I can't do that. And I remember there was a pause on the phone, and Jim said, Doctor, you don't understand. Either you can give us the sample, or I'm coming over there with some of my men, and we're going to take a sample. At that point, I realized I better negotiate, and I think we wound up splitting it. The second thing I remember about that conversation, and to this day it amazes me, is when I said, do you have any idea who this fellow is making this stuff? And his remark, it was almost casual. He said, oh yeah, we know who this guy is. We've known about this guy for 2 years. He said he was associated with this house that mysteriously blew up in Saratoga. And I said, well, why isn't he behind bars? And he said, we can't touch him. And after he explained that to me, that was the first time I'd heard about designer drugs, these new synthetics that are altered so they're beyond the reach of the law. He said, our only hope is to get this guy on his income taxes, and I was just floored.
Norris couldn't identify the sample, nor could pharmacologist Gary Henderson, the inventor of the term designer drug. For years, Henderson had been warning of the terrifying potential of synthetic narcotics. Tiny design changes to a molecule like this can make it thousands of times more potent than morphine. It was not only dangerous, but perfectly legal.
Now, the real important thing from the legal standpoint is if you simply put another group here, for example, regardless of what it does to the activity, under the old drug laws, it was a new chemical and therefore not restricted. It could have all the properties of heroin, could look like it, act like it, taste like it, produce all the effects and side effects. But because it is a new chemical and not listed on any drug list, it was strictly legal.
As the search for the unknown substance continued, the condition of the frozen addicts was deteriorating.
David, can you stand up? Let's try to stand up, okay? Can you stand up for me? Well, it's a considerable amount of rigidity.
You don't know? Well, we'll give it a try here. I'll give you a little bit at a time.
They were by now invalids, quite unable to wash or feed themselves.
You want water with that?
What? again, all right? We're good. We just got a little more.
So bad was their condition that Langston decided to put them on the treatment given to sufferers of Parkinson's disease, the drug L-Dopa. Nobody was sure if it would work, but the effect was miraculous. They came back to life.
Can you hop on your right foot? On your left foot? Okay. Can you put your hands above your head? Okay. Very good.
Langston realized that he might be onto something big. What had begun as a drug tragedy might help unravel one of the world's major brain diseases affecting 1 person in 100 over the age of 60.
Okay. Can you touch your fingers to your nose?
L-Dopa replaces dopamine, a naturally occurring brain chemical without which we would all freeze up. Without dopamine, the thought of lifting an arm can't be translated into the act of lifting an arm. If enough of the cells making dopamine die, people get Parkinson's disease. The characteristic tremor, increasing rigidity, and leading eventually to complete disablement. Langston realized that in the frozen addicts, this process was speeded up hundreds of times. Something in the synthetic heroin had passed into the brain, and avoiding every other structure had destroyed just that small area of brain that makes dopamine, the substantia nigra. To understand this toxin might be to begin to understand Parkinson's disease. The next clue as to what that toxin was would come from the crime lab. For one of Jim Norris's colleagues, a toxicologist, Hallie Weingarten, the idea that a toxic chemical could cause a Parkinsonian state stirred a memory. Buried away in her files was an obscure article written in the late 70s. As the article revealed, George Carrillo wasn't the first victim of a bad synthetic drug. There had been an almost identical case 6 years before. For William Langston, this article provided the missing clue, for in this case, the victim had known the formula of the drug he had taken. The article told the tragic story of Barry Kidston, a 23-year-old student from Bethesda, Maryland, with a long history of drug abuse. In the summer of 1976, he bought a chemistry set, and in the basement of his parents' house began making his own narcotics. After 6 months of doing this, he hurried a batch. On injecting himself, his body froze. He couldn't speak. He developed the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Barry was referred to the close-by National Institute of Mental Health, where after treatment with L-Dopa, he was able to tell investigators just what he had tried to make.
He wanted to get a drug related to Demerol. That was his favorite drug of abuse, which he'd been able to get fairly readily when he was overseas. And he wanted to avoid clandestine sources of supply. So he decided, after looking through the scientific literature, that this looked like an easy compound to make. It should give him the same effects as Demerol or a heroin-like high without running up against the law. He was going to do this all in his own basement. It was certainly an ambitious undertaking, certainly much more ambitious than most undergraduates would begin to do in their school laboratory.
The drug Barry was trying to make was called MPPP. Chemically quite different from heroin, it produced the same kind of high and was easier to make. Was this the toxin that had given Barry Parkinson's disease?
About here.
Markey injected MPPP into rats to see if they would come down with the disease. And lo and behold, the rats froze up. For Markey and his colleagues back in 1977, it looked as if they were on the verge of an important discovery. But an hour or so later, the rats started to unfreeze. The effect was temporary, whereas Barry's condition was permanent. It was not Parkinsonism. This was a serious setback for the team of scientists now working on this unique case. But there were other possibilities.
And I've started putting it together here, and you can see from the drawings that he's made.
Using Barry's detailed notes and Barry's own equipment, Markey tried to duplicate in his NIMH lab just what Barry had done. Markey reasoned that Barry must have made a mistake. Used too much heat or acid in this reaction, and there is a danger of making side products. Was this what Barry had done? As Markey tried to forget all his scientific training and do sloppy chemistry, he got a lucky break. He noticed that trapped in the glassware, buried in the grease, there was a small amount of powder, the last remaining trace of Barry's last synthesis. Knowing the formula Barry had used, this tiny amount was enough for Markey to analyze in a mass spectrometer. It showed that Barry had indeed made a sloppy synthesis. In addition to the drug he was trying to make, MPPP, he had also made a side product, MPTP. Could this be the toxic chemical? For some reason, the researchers never tested pure MPTP in rats. Then one day in September 1978, Barry came to the grounds of the NIH, sat down under a tree, took an overdose of cocaine, and died. His parents gave permission for an autopsy, and results removed any skepticism. The substantia nigra of his brain was extensively damaged. The substantia nigra of a normal brain looks like this. Barry's was like a Parkinsonian brain. All the black pigment was missing. Thus, in 1978, 4 years before George Carrillo took the bad heroin, researchers had uncovered a clear link between a synthetic drug and a Parkinsonian state. Why then did no one hear of their discovery? The research was destined for obscurity. First, the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine rejected the article on technical grounds. Then, the Journal of the American Medical Association insisted that one of the 7 authors drop out as a condition of publication. Because no one would drop out, it was eventually placed in the first volume of a brand new journal, Psychiatry Research, published in Holland, and it remained largely unread. But 3 years later, when Langston read this remarkable article, he was struck by a powerful thought. Was it possible that the California designer drug maker had tried the same synthesis as Barry and made the same mistake?
Hello?
Langston read the formulas Barry Kidston had used over the phone to chemist Ian Irwin, who realized immediately that the same chemical synthesis was involved. Like Barry, the California designer chemist was trying to make MPPP. And like Barry, he had used too much heat and made MPTP as well. In fact, he had done the synthesis so badly that some of the samples were almost 99% side product, almost pure MPTP. Langston strongly suspected that MPTP, which hadn't been tested in rats, was the toxin, but he wanted to know more. Because Barry Kidston had based his experiments on some long-forgotten articles written in the 1940s, Langston went to Stanford University to read them for himself. But someone had been there first. All the articles had been razored out.
It was really an eerie feeling because I had the sense I was crossing paths with this individual, this person that was now a part in our imagination that I'd never seen. That shock started turning to anger after I went to additional journals because every single one that had a relevant article had been razor bladed at.
The scientists back at NIMH, having heard about the California tragedy, were back in the game. Whereas Barry had been an isolated case, now there was a virtual epidemic. Anxious to make up for lost time, they set about finding out what they had missed. When Markey had previously tested MPPP in rats, it produced a temporary paralysis, but not Parkinsonism. Now he tried injecting pure MPTP to see if it would cause a permanent Parkinsonian state and kill cells in the substantia nigra. To many people's surprise, it had absolutely no effect whatsoever. To this date, nobody has produced Parkinsonism in a rat. For one of Markey's colleagues, Stan Burns, this came as no surprise. From the outset, he reasoned that rats were so physiologically different from humans that it would never work. To test if MPTP was toxic, you had to use an animal like a human, another primate, for example, a monkey. Burns was right. In monkeys, the effect of MPTP is dramatic. They freeze up. And their Parkinsonism can be reversed with L-DOPA. From Barry Kidston to the California addicts, they had all been struck down by the same substance, a simple molecule produced by a piece of sloppy chemistry, MPTP.
So here we've got a simple molecule that, like a Nike missile, goes right in past all the organs in the body, skips all other areas of brain and hones right in on this same area that is damaged in Parkinson's disease. This has a lot of implications.
The first implication was that now scientists had an animal model for what had always been an exclusively human disease. Research could move forward for the first time in years.
This was a godsend. I mean, it was even better than you would dream of in the sense of a chemical that you give systemically that only destroys the group of cells that are responsible for the clinical manifestations of Parkinson's disease. I was not so much on a hunt for what was the causative agent to explain the cases in heroin abusers. I wanted to find the chemical that would reproduce Parkinsonism in monkeys in particular, because that would be a wonderful tool.
Obviously, you can't do a lot of experiments on humans. In fact, you can do very few experiments on humans. So that limits you tremendously in being able to study the disease and do basic research. And in fact, in many ways, I think basic research in Parkinson's disease was almost dead in the water when this came along. I mean, where do you look? What do you do?
MPTP opened a whole new era in Parkinson's disease research. Scientists from all over the world started jumping on the bandwagon. The first thing that happened was that the price of MPTP for experiments shot up. In 1982, the Aldrich Chemical Company sold 5 grams for $11, but 2 years later, it was 860 times more expensive.
It's now extraordinarily expensive. In fact, a bottle of MPTP that was given to us by Aldrich Chemical Company so we could do some toxicology studies on it, by our current estimate, is worth $210,000. We still have it. We should have it in the safe. The other kind of interesting figure that Ian worked out, our chemist, is that currently neuroscientists working with MPTP are paying approximately 5 times what addicts on the street paid to get this back in 1982.
Now, the secret of MPTP was out. Could Langston keep up? He was a clinical neurologist in a county hospital with almost no basic research experience and no funding. Remarkably, he found himself on the crest of a wave of interest, both in the designer drug phenomenon and the search for a cure for Parkinson's disease. For years, this had been a moribund research field. Now, the various Parkinson's foundations rallied around to fund the new wave of research. For patients like those in the Oregon chapter of the American Parkinson's Disease Foundation, there was hope for the first time of real progress. In meetings and in newsletters, the message was one of optimism.
I think it's a very exciting time for research in this disease. For all of us, it's had a tremendously invigorating effect on basic research in this country. And for patients with Parkinson's disease and their families, that's good news. Thank you very much.
Parkinson's disease is a disease of aging. The older one is, the more likely one is to get it.
It involves, in general, we would say 1 person in 1,000 of the general population, but since it's a disease that increases with age, over the age of 40, it's 1 in 200. Over the age of 60, it's 1 in 100. And over a lifetime, there's a chance in 40 of developing the disease if you live to a normal expectancy.
Dr. Andre Barbeau pioneered L-DOPA therapy back in the 1960s. People called it a miracle drug. It has the power to transform even an invalid like Connie, who without medication has no voluntary control over her movements.
We'll probably do that again a little later when hopefully the medicine works. Now what I want you to do is try to reach out and touch my finger. Let's try to make it a little easier. Try to just take this hand and just reach up and touch my hand. Can you do that with your fist? Just get your arm up there. Do your best. Try to get your right arm up there. Are you trying? Okay, so you can't really do that right now. I can see the tremor's getting a little worse. Let's try it on the other side. Just try to hit my hand like a boxer. Can you do that? Let's try to hit my hand.
L-DOPA gives her back what most people take for granted, voluntary control of her body.
And you couldn't even do that a while ago, could you? And actually, that's quite fast. Good. Now let's try it with this hand, okay? Same thing. Tip of my finger to your nose. Very good.
But the miracle has a price.
Several of them have to take medication every 2 to 3 hours just to be able to move. Some of them even get up at night and take it. Even that is not a guarantee that they're going to be all right, because with time you get these serious side effects.
Connie was plagued with uncontrollable writhing movements, a common L-DOPA side effect which leads to dramatic weight loss. David has suffered from this also.
At times, David's had terrible problems with this and actually has lost a lot of weight, haven't you, David?
Mm-hmm.
About how much weight have you lost because of them?
About 40 pounds.
40 pounds. They've actually been disabling at times, and that's been our big enemy in trying to get him balanced. It's a typical problem you see with Parkinson's disease. You get side effects if you go up enough to be effective. You go down and the patient frees up.
George, the original case, has another common L-DOPA side effect.
Now, are you having any problem with the hallucinations now? Are those coming?
now.
You having them right now?
Yeah.
Can you tell me what they're like?
They're real creepy, man. It's like a big snake coming to get me.
Like what?
The snake coming to get me.
Like a snake's coming to get you?
Yeah.
That's the one you often have. That sounds very frightening, is it?
It is.
For the cases caused by MPTP and for millions of ordinary Parkinson's sufferers, L-DOPA isn't a final solution. In fact, it can be a therapeutic trap. For the new worldwide research initiative, one pressing goal was to find alternative therapies that would allow people to move without debilitating side effects. Then a staggering development occurred that was to send some researchers in a completely different direction. One day, Langston received a letter from a pharmaceutical chemist in New Jersey who had read about the discovery of MPTP in the press. He reported that MPTP was not new. He had worked with the compound for years back in the 1970s on the laboratory bench. Then at 37 years old, he noticed that things started to go wrong. His tennis game began to fall apart. His serve continually went into the net. He developed early signs of what he now realized might be Parkinsonism. Langston was horrified.
This was shortly after all these calls and knowing all these scientists were getting it, and I thought, what have we done? You know, we've set the world off on using MPTP in labs, and here the stuff can cause the disease, you know, just from exposure. So I felt quite panicked that we might have done something that could be quite harmful. So we immediately rushed a letter out in the New England Journal of Medicine describing this chemist and his case and really warning people that if you're using MPTP, be careful.
Then at NIMH, Stan Burns heard from a Danish chemist who had languished for 9 years in a psychiatric ward with a diagnosis of catatonic schizophrenia.
When the MPTP story broke in the press, the ex-wife of this chemist read one and read the description and said, that's what happened to my ex-husband. She called the doctor involved who had taken care of him and said, I wonder whether he wasn't exposed to the same chemical. They went back at the pharmaceutical firm, and lo and behold, that's exactly what he had his hands on the few weeks before he developed it. And so it's really to the credit of the ex-wife that he was diagnosed and that case then became apparent.
This perfectly sane individual only worked with MPTP for 2 or 3 weeks. It was turning out to be a very toxic chemical.
Exposure by inhalation, by skin contact, and probably by any route. I mean, if you swallowed it, if you injected it, any systemic exposure of the body, it goes to the brain cells and it kills them off.
The very first man to encounter this toxic substance was its discoverer, the now retired author of the missing articles from the 1940s, Dr. Albert Ziering of Hoffman-La Roche. Langston called him to see if he'd had any health problems.
I'm glad to report he was in excellent health and a very bright man, a very lively man. And as we were chatting about MPTP and his early experience with it when he made it, I remember he paused in the conversation and said, "You know, I vaguely remember getting a report back that MPTP was toxic." And I said, "Well, how could that be?" He said, "Well, normally we make these compounds and we send them off, to another part of the company." I then went to the head of the research division of this company, and he was helpful, although it took some pushing. And eventually, I was able to get him to read a report to me that was filed in 1960. And in fact, MPTP, back in the 50s, had actually been tried out experimentally in animals. The first report was on rats, and an MPTP didn't do much in rats, and we now know it doesn't do much in rats. However, they then took it to primates. They actually gave it to a total of 6 monkeys. And in higher doses, those monkeys froze up, became rigid, unable to move, and died. More remarkably, they then tried this out in humans, 6 humans. And in what I consider the crowning irony of this story, and this is a story full of ironies, is that this drug was being tried as a treatment for Parkinson's disease.
While being given MPTP, 2 of the 6 people died, and Hoffman-La Roche discontinued testing. Since the 1960s, other drug companies have tested MPTP in animals for everything from heart disease to blood pressure. Did they realize its toxicity? Only the ones who expensively tested it in monkeys, and amazingly, under FDA regulations, that's not required.
I recently learned that current policy requires testing only in rats. You can theoretically take a new drug, test it in rats, and go straight to human trials. With MPTP, this disastrous Parkinsonian state that it causes would have been missed completely because rats don't get it. So if, just as happened back in the 50s, you would have missed it completely by skipping over primates. And I think there's a real message here. And the message is that drugs, before they're tried in humans, should be tested for toxicity, not only in rats, but in primates. And I think people are starting to look at this. If there's a moral, it's that men are not mice.
Drugs affect different animals quite differently. A dose of morphine that would kill a man would merely put a dog to sleep. MPPP, which temporarily paralyzes a rat, gives a human a heroin-like high. On the other hand, the side product MPTP, which gives humans Parkinson's disease, leaves a rat totally unaffected.
If you're going to study Parkinson's disease and you're going to take out of the MPTP story an animal model, you have to work in primates. And the reason you have to work in non-human primates is because it's qualitatively similar. It's the same as in the patients with Parkinson's disease. So the findings with research are going to be easily transferable to considering the human situation. When you get to lower animal species, and I'd use the example of dogs or canines, the motor system isn't the same, and no longer are the symptoms and signs qualitatively the same.
The 1/2 Americans with ordinary Parkinson's disease have never injected or snorted synthetic drugs, nor worked at a chemical bench. How did they get the disease? The cause of Parkinson's disease has always been something of a mystery. So far, no virus has ever been found. Recently, a very large study was completed investigating whether it was a genetic inherited disease. Identical twins have identical genes. If Parkinson's disease was a genetic inherited condition, then if one twin developed it, you'd expect the other to as well. Yet in a vast study of affected identical twins, all but one pair were like the Brown sisters. One sister got the disease, like Mary on the right. The other, with identical genes, did not. If Parkinson's disease isn't genetic or caused by a virus, that leaves the environment. It is revealing that before James Parkinson described the disease in 1817, there are few convincing accounts of the condition. That means it could be a disease of the industrial age. It's known that prolonged exposure to manganese causes Parkinsonism among miners, and changes in mineral content of water and soil may explain why in certain Pacific islands like Guam, the incidence was until recently 5 times that of the USA. Yet when you discount specific causes like these, for the vast majority of cases worldwide across all cultures and races, there is no obvious cause. Clinicians refer to it as idiopathic, meaning unknown, Parkinson's disease. Could that unknown be something in the environment?
Probably, for most people that get the disease, it's something out there in the environment, somewhere, someplace. Now, if you link this with the almost simultaneous discovery of a very simple molecule that can get in through inhalation or exposure to the skin, you've got a pretty powerful hypothesis there, that in fact it is environmental, and that those of us that get it are getting exposed to something out there. MPTP is a pyridine. Now, that's a chemical name. But pyridines are all over the place. They're very common. To the best of my knowledge, no one has ever made a methodical search in the environment looking for MPTP or MPTP-like compounds.
Out there in our everyday world, are there toxins which can account for most cases of Parkinson's disease? It's a controversial theory that has divided the scientific establishment. Its proponents say that if true, it might work like this. From cradle to grave, our brain cells die off through natural causes at the rate of a few % every decade. To get Parkinson's disease, 8/10 of the cells in the substantia nigra must die. So aging alone can't account for the disease. Humans who get Parkinson's disease, therefore, must lose additional brain cells by some other means. They might suffer a serious external environmental attack at some stage, which kills off, say, about half of these nigral cells. Then normal aging finishes the job. When the 80% threshold is reached, the disease begins. So aging is involved, but ultimately the cause of the disease is something in the environment.
I think the environmental cause for Parkinson's disease is one of the most exciting prospects to come about in the last few years out of the MPTP research. I believe that it's going to be something very subtle because the epidemiology of Parkinson's disease is that it's found really worldwide over many cultures, and that's been well documented. So that it must be some substance which is common in the fact that our own bodies are producing it, or is a product of our diet, something that we can convert to an MPTP-like substance, something in intermediary metabolism, something that we make.
While people speculated about the cause of Parkinson's disease, something quite unexpected happened. Several of the research labs working on MPTP uncovered a bombshell. It turned out that surprisingly, MPTP wasn't quite the villain everyone had assumed. MPTP by itself wasn't even toxic. The problem lay in the brain's complex waste disposal system, where unwanted toxins are pounced upon by special enzymes and rendered harmless. At least that's what usually happens. When MPTP enters the brain, one enzyme in this system does something disastrous. It takes this harmless molecule and transforms it into a highly toxic one, MPP+. So toxic, in fact, that a chemical company had already synthesized it as an herbicide, Ciproquat.
Ciproquat, or MPP+, was test marketed about 10 years ago as an herbicide. It's chemically related to paraquat, which is a much better known herbicide.
The California street drug that had caused Parkinson's disease was not itself toxic. It became toxic because the MPTP in it was transformed in the brain into an herbicide. Herbicides and pesticides have been extensively used in North America for over 40 years. If such widely used chemicals are related in some way to Parkinson's disease, the implications are, to say the least, alarming. Dr. André Barbeau in Canada decided to take one region, Quebec, as a test case to see if the incidence of Parkinson's disease could be linked with any toxins in the environment. Firstly, to many people's surprise, he found that far from being uniform, the disease varied 7-fold across 9 different regions. It was highest in Region 3, the main agricultural area, the so-called breadbasket of Quebec. Then Barbeau plotted the use of pesticides in Quebec, and the map was identical. Where there were pesticides, there was Parkinsonism. This didn't prove pesticides were responsible. Anything in the agricultural landscape might be to blame. The data showed another striking correlation. The 15 hotspots that had by far the highest amount of Parkinson's disease were all near pulp and paper mills. So a number of toxins may be involved.
It may be the pesticides themselves. I'm not ruling that out, but I'm not saying that is the cause. It may be the nature of the soil. In the pulp and paper industry, there are about 30 different compounds being used. Some of it may get to the environment, may be toxic. We're now sorting this out. We're working with pulp and paper industry, and we're working with the agricultural department and the environmental departments to identify in a very specific control area all the pollutants that have been used over the last 100 years. And some, one argument that is often given is that pesticides have only been around for 40 years. This is not true. People were using what we call in French ver de Paris, which is arsenic compounds, for hundreds of years.
Pesticides are just one possible cause. In our industrial world, MPTP-like substances are used throughout the chemical industry and are found in many foods and beverages and even in chewing gum and cigarette smoke. Dr. Barbeau's results have been met with a mixture of intense interest and skepticism. Scientists await further studies to confirm his dramatic findings.
I think the analogy here is that of fishing versus hunting. People have been looking for 100 years or more for the cause of Parkinson's disease, but they were fishing. They were looking at everything. They weren't focused. We now are hunting, specifically looking for chemicals, one or more chemicals in the environment that might play a role in Parkinson's disease. Dr. Barbeau's data that I presented is quite dramatic. Is that an
Results in other areas of research, just as dramatic as Barbeau's, were coming in from labs all over the world. A major breakthrough was made by scientists in San Francisco investigating the deadly transformation of MPTP in the brain. They actually identified the guilty enzyme that caused MPTP to become the lethal MPP+. It was a very common enzyme known as MAO. If you could block this enzyme, then MPTP would remain harmless. And such a blocking drug was available, Pargolene. Scientists rushed to try the obvious experiment.
When you give MPTP to an animal, usually within hours, they're Parkinsonian. They're slowed, quiet, don't move, clearly affected. One dose of Pargolene, which is an MAO inhibitor, before MPTP, and these animals are doing handsprings an hour later. It's so dramatic. Secondly, when you look at their brains, whereas the nigral neurons would be gone, dead, wiped out, they're totally normal. It completely prevents cell death. Quite dramatic.
In the excitement, it emerged that a similar enzyme-blocking drug called Depronil had been given to patients with Parkinson's disease in Europe. It had fewer side effects, and it seemed to help.
Depronil seemed to be slowing the progress of the disease. In fact, in that article, they actually concluded they were preventing nigral cell death. So here we have the real disease now that is being slowed apparently by MAO inhibitor therapy, and we have MPTP Parkinsonism. These two together generated some real excitement. Is there the hope now for the first time we might be able to alter the course of the disease? If we could, this comes none too soon, because we're at a stage now where many neurologists are quite disillusioned with L-DOPA, other medications that stimulate dopamine receptors because of all these side effects. It just seems like you conquer one and another one comes along. It's gotten to be a very challenging problem in neurology. A new therapeutic strategy, altering the course of the disease, could be very exciting, particularly with Parkinson's disease, because the disease is so mild when people first come in. If you could halt it at that point, you could give them an almost normal life.
As Dr. Langston's group got the go-ahead late last year for a Depronil trial, scientists at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver announced a remarkable technical breakthrough. They had developed a method of detecting Parkinson's disease before there are any clinical symptoms at all. This California drug user has no clinical symptoms, yet deep inside his brain there may be scars from the one dose of MPTP he took back in 1982. A mildly radioactive chemical is injected that will enter the brain and spread out along the dopamine pathways, provided those pathways are undamaged. The positron emission tomography, or PET scanner, is able to track the passage of this chemical by photographing dozens of brain sections from the bottom to the top of the brain. In a normal brain, the top section looks like this. But in a Parkinsonian brain, much less radioactive chemical gets through to this key motor area. But would such a dramatic contrast show up in this MPTP case? He may have no symptoms yet, but his PET scan shows he is well on the way to getting the disease.
We can see Parkinson's disease before it develops clinically. If we then have a way of halting further cell death, and we could intervene at that time, we could literally start people on therapy before they ever got the disease, and no more Parkinson's disease. The way it would work in reality and the things that would be required would be the PET scan would have to be turned into a screening tool. Right now it's just a basic research tool. I'm told the technology's there. It's not practical yet, but it could be done possibly. And one of these new therapeutic strategies to slow the progress of the disease would have to work. But if both of those occur, and maybe we're in the 21st century now, I don't know yet, but if both of those work, then people could routinely go in at a certain age. Say you go in for your EKG, heart tracing at age 40. You go in for your PET scan for your striatal dopamine at age 50. If it's normal, great. If it's down and you're on your way, you start Deprenyl, and that's it.
But what of people who are too late for Deprenyl, who already have the disease in an advanced form, who've already lost the cells in the substantia nigra? What can be done for them? Perhaps one day even this might be curable. At Yerke's Primate Center, they've been trying to reverse Parkinsonism by surgically replacing the damaged substantia nigra with new dopamine-producing cells. These 3 monkeys have all got MPTP Parkinsonism. But after brain grafts, they move almost normally. It's much too early to know if it'll work in humans, but research is moving rapidly ahead on all fronts.
I would say in the next 5 or 10 years, there are guarantees of new information in our understanding of Parkinson's disease, which are going to come from those studies. They're almost predictable. Also, the perspective, how clinicians view Parkinson's disease and its treatment, it's already changed. There are things now that are clearly due to the severity of the disease and not to chronic L-DOPA treatment, which in the past were blamed on chronic L-DOPA treatment. It will change the way drugs are given. It will change the way people understand the pathophysiology of the disease, the functional disturbance. It will alter and has altered the view about which chemical substances that are disturbed in the disease are important in terms of symptomatic treatment.
If medical research has thrived, so has the California designer drug business. Underground labs have spawned a whole series of designer heroines, some of very high quality. And as fast as one is made illegal, new ones are designed. Authorities are now worried about designer versions of other drugs like cocaine. Last September 27th, California passed state legislation outlawing the drug family that struck down George and another series based on the fentanyl molecule. Meanwhile, in Washington, federal hearings were held last summer, and the mood was passionate.
Try to imagine never being able to move normally again, never being able to raise your arm when you wanted to, never being able to walk to the dinner table. Your life permanently and forever changed. That's what it does.
A designer drug bill now exists in draft form and may soon become law. And what of the suspect the San Jose police had their eyes on? After the fire inspection, he and his colleagues fled. He is now in jail in Texas, not for making designer heroin, but for manufacturing an illegal street drug, PCP. A lawyer, he continues to deny his responsibility in the MPTP affair. But in a final twist of irony, before his arrest, he actually developed early signs of Parkinsonism and went to see Dr. Langston. The men spend 2 days together as doctor and patient. For the designer drug victims, there is little immediate hope. They live on a narrow ledge between being completely frozen and having terrible side effects. But for the millions of sufferers of Parkinson's disease around the world, the future has never looked brighter. All because of the case of the frozen addict.
For a transcript of this program, send $4 to Nova, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Please be sure to include the show title. To purchase film or video copies of this program for educational use, call toll-free 1-800-621-2131. In Illinois or Alaska, call Collect, 312-940-1260. Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials. And the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying health care products worldwide.